Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we're joined by J. Christopher King, Academian, and Nathan. So hey everybody.
What's going on?
Hey James.
Hey man.
And everybody
so
else.
Great to see you. All right.
Yeah, so today we're here to talk about the gateway experience, and some people may be familiar with the gateway experience just because there was a CIA document called the Gateway Process, and it was some people investigating the gateway experience and actually going through it and how it relates to consciousness. So the gateway experience is actually organized, put together by Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute. That going back to the early 70s, Robert Monroe was somebody who is well known in these kind of fields and communities for out-of-body experiences. And he claimed that he was able to induce out-of-body experiences, so he could almost do it at will through practices. And some of that involved what is called HemiSync, and that's a technology that he developed where you basically use sound and tones and different tones in each ear, and it creates a hemispheric synchronization in the brain. And he claimed this helped with the process of being able to achieve the out-of-body experience. And he was a sound engineer, so from early on in his career, he was kind of like messing around with sound and how it affects consciousness and inducing these altered states. And the gateway experience is like this entire at-home program that has all these different waves, and each wave is basically like a CD. And there's actually 6 or 7 waves. There's 7 waves because they I think initially they had 6 after a number of years, and then they added Voyager, which was the 7th one, which is supposed to be, I guess, like the super advanced one. And people talk that Voyager, like all the remote viewers used it, and it's like the far out one. But does anybody want to say any initial thoughts on it? Darren?
Yeah, I think I would say initially my understanding is that for Bob Monroe, he set this up because he started having these experiences by accident at first. And he was actually concerned about his mental health. He wasn't sure if he was just imagining it, if he was delusional, having hallucinations. So he actually brought together some people to try and determine, number one, if he was legitimately having these experiences by finding evidence. For instance, right, if you went to a certain room and saw something without actually going there physically and you could report on it later, then that would actually demonstrate that legitimately happened, that you actually saw something in the physical world, but you were in your astral form. And then once they were fairly sure that this was a real thing that was happening, then they thought, how can we maybe build some technologies that can help other people learn how to do this as well?
Yeah, and just so people listening, this is kind of like a study group. This is a kind of a preliminary video where we're talking about the gateway experience and kind of where we are now with it, because we're all kind of part of this little study group we're doing. And we're going to go through the actual gateway process. We haven't gone through it yet, as far as I know. Darren, have you actually gone through it before?
Not the full gateway experience, no.
Okay. And what about you, Nathan and Jay? Have you guys gone through it?
And only the initial stages for me.
Okay.
And all I've done is download the tracks and listen to about the first 3 minutes. So I'm a total novice when it comes to the gateway experience, but I'm really looking forward to it. We can talk about it later. I've got a few reservations, but I'm really excited about getting into it with you all, and I think it'll be fun to do it, and a little bit maybe more safe and interesting to do it in this format with 3 people I respect and appreciate. So it'll be awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool to do it in this kind of study group format, like Jay said, and be able to compare notes. And I know, if the the gateway process, it actually comes with like instructions and Q&A stuff and the PDF materials, or however you get the actual materials. And they recommend that you keep a journal, but I would definitely say it's ideal to keep at least a like a track of, okay, these are the waves I've done, and kind of where I'm at, because you might want to go back into like you might do a track on, say you're in the first wave of 7 waves and you're on track 3 and you're like, what, I didn't really feel that I got that. I wasn't really, I didn't feel strong in the exercise, and you might want to revisit it and do that track over. So there's going to be a large amount of variability into how each person goes through all the waves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that since we will have that kind of private experience, it's going to be great. Just kind of going at our own pace. At least I'm looking forward to doing it that way. But I'm also aware that the Monroe Institute, has kind of a formal facility, and they have a specific kind of thing that they do on site on the facility. And I know, Darren, you've been there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that is like there, what the Institute itself is, and what kind of either rooms or technologies they use to help deepen the experience.
Yeah, well, you take a rocket up to the space station, and from there you have a view of the moon and the Earth. I'm just kidding. That's not what happens. Yes, I did go there. It's interesting because, number one, it's located in the Blue Ridge Mountains, like where Nathan and I live, but on the Virginia side. And it's in a beautiful location amongst these rolling hills. It's basically like a big house. And there's like several floors. I think there's 3 floors. There's also a couple of additional buildings where they have for meeting rooms and whatnot. But the main location is one house, and there are individual rooms. And within those rooms, they usually have 2 cubicles each. And a cubicle is basically a completely blacked out room. So you climb into the cubicle, you pull the curtain shut, and the room is completely blacked out. You could wave your hand in front of your face and you wouldn't see it. And they both beam sound through the walls. There's speakers in the walls. And you also have headphones you can use as well, where you can adjust each side. And like James said, the goal with HemiSync technology is to synchronize the 2 hemispheres of the brain. So they're playing 2 tones, usually with only, a really close interval between them. And then what your brain does is it harmonizes those 2. So you actually end up hearing what feels like one tone when actually it's the 2 hemispheres working together. And so, yeah, the way the program works when you're there in person, although I haven't done the gateway experience, I've done kind of a private group meeting. You meet as a group in some of these meeting rooms. You talk about what's going to happen. You plan it out, and then you retire to one of these cubicles, and they beam through these sound programs that run from anywhere to 35 to 45, maybe an hour, kind of long. And sometimes there's speaking, giving you instructions. There's also music quite often, but underlying the music is that binaural kind of tone that is working with your brain. And that's really the only difference in person, is that you're with people over a weekend kind of thing. You have these meeting rooms where you can debrief and talk about what you're going to do. And then you retire to these rooms where you have a cubicle you climb into that just basically blocks out the world so you can fully focus on what you're doing.
Yeah,
Nice.
and that's interesting because that's like sensory deprivation, which they've done the studies, especially the CIA, with sensory deprivation, and like, yeah, if you that's very much like Stranger Things, where 11 is using sensory deprivation to tap into her psychic abilities. So it's funny that the Monroe Institute is kind of like, I guess maybe they experimented with it, or they implemented it because they found out that it worked. But the personally, so far I went through the first wave, and I started the second wave, and even the first wave, I a number of tracks I kind of just went through because I felt very good with them. And I think, one or two of them, I felt like, okay, I went back and I did it again just to make sure I got it. Because they have, even within the first wave, there's a number of different practices that, and they start off with something called the energy conversion box, which again, the system is using the HemiSync tones, but you have Bob Monroe in the first few waves is giving like a kind of instruction and guided meditation almost. It's more instructional. So it starts off and you're hearing the tones and you hear Bob Monroe, and he gives you instructions based on whatever wave and what track you're on in that wave. Each wave has 6 tracks, and you start off in the first wave with the energy conversion box, and then there's kind of like a Monroe Institute, I want to say, or HemiSync affirmation, which I think is kind of, if I could say, it's positive suggestive programming. I don't mean that in the wrong way. I mean that in a kind of like opening your mind way. What do you guys think about that? Just say the affirmation in general.
Yeah,
Like
I've had a chance to go through it a couple of times, and that's one of the things I kind of like about it, is that it is really sort of technical. I know both of you have some history with the meditation practice, and I've done some mindfulness meditation in my past as well, but it's been very unstructured or loosely structured for me. So to have something that has a kind of a real structure to it, and also there seems to be some degree of kind of science around it, the way that it's trying to entrain the brain into creating these induced states of brainwave activity, the sensory deprivation component. These are things that we know through scientific study, do cause changes in the way that the brain functions. The affirmations itself, I find those to be, on my first listen, I found it to be a little bit just weird, because I'd never been in a practice where I had that kind of coming at me. And it took me really probably 3 or 4 times going through the first wave experience to where I felt like I really was not only getting it, but doing it, and kind of having an actual experience with it. The first time I did it, to be totally honest, I fell asleep. I was like just way too comfortable, and I fell asleep, and I woke up toward the end, and I was like, well, I don't know what just happened there. But I'm looking forward to this very stepped process, and I think your suggestion earlier about the journal, that resonated a lot with me. I'm not a journaler, but I can see that we have a lot of value to be able to write down just reflections and experiences with each of these waves, even if you do them over and over again, because I think you would have a different experience each time. So that, to me, that seems really helpful. Also a good way to kind of get data and then compare notes with what you guys experience as you go through it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add too is that just so people know a bit more about it, the energy conversion box is basically the step where you're putting all your concerns and your fears about the everyday world aside so you can focus. So again, same thing with the sensory deprivation, whether you're in a cubicle actually at the Monroe Institute and blacked out, or if you're hopefully in your room lying in a comfortable bed or sitting in a comfortable chair without kids making noise in the background or dogs barking. The idea is to try to block out the everyday world and block out your everyday thinking, as well as your incessant thoughts that are constantly sort of going in the monkey mind. If you can put all that aside, you're much more likely to have a successful astral journey. And that's really what they're trying to help facilitate with those steps.
Yeah, and I mean, even during like a guided meditation by any number of meditation teachers, they'll usually put that into like 2 sentences, like 1 or 2 sentences. They'll say something like, oh, let your worries fade away or something like that, and then kind of just move on. But this is an actual technique or method in a way where it's almost like a technique that you're using to kind of square away any worries or concerns. He even says, put your physical body too. Energy conversion box, just like so it's a way of kind of opening yourself and liberating yourself to that whole kind of process of what you're going to do with the HemiSync technology and the instructions that go on. And there's another technique there. It's called the resonant tuning, and it's suggested. I mean, not even, it's instructed that you actually do almost like a
vocalization, right?
Yeah, it's a vocal.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, vocalization. I was going to say almost like a toning, or what somebody would call like a chanting or a mantra, but it's I know in some yoga circles they call it toning. So you're actually using a vocalization, and they want, Bob Monroe in the instruction says you have to do it because it has to do with sound and frequency and stuff, and he says it in there that it's actually because of that, and it's going to help with the energetic process of the system.
Yeah, I would just quickly add on that, that, I mean, people generally know this, or at least they've heard this, but this is a good example where sound is vibration, right?
Right.
Sound is frequency. So by doing the humming, and it's kind of like a mid to low tone humming, that you hear the sound in your ears, and then you try and reproduce that sound, it actually will vibrate your entire body. So what that actually helps you learn to do and learn to experience is a single frequency running through your entire body. And that begins to help with this. And the other piece I would add too is that when you could say to someone, just put your fears aside, but by actually getting them to visualize this energy conversion box, like shut the heavy lid and close it behind, right? So I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I listen to that, I actually have a very clear visualization on a hillside in front of an ocean where I close this round thing and then lock it in a certain way. And so that becomes like a bookmark in my memory that I can then do very quickly, that actually helps. And it's almost like Jungian in terms of active imagination. Like you can actually use these techniques to facilitate changes in frequency and energy, which again, this will be surprising or outlandish to some people, but that's kind of, I think, what reality is in some ways. And by all these techniques kind of help you to think about and experience reality in that way, so that it becomes more normative when you begin to have these like non-ordinary kind of state experiences.
Yeah, and these different techniques are like tools, like you said. Like once you kind of have it down, you can always go to it and use it. And the funny thing is, for what I've been doing with the energy conversion box, has been using a tesseract, like this blue energetic tesseract. I don't know, for whatever reason, that's what popped in, and I've been using it ever since.
Why not go big, right? Why not?
Yeah, love that.
Yeah. We recently on the Experiencer group, we recently for book club did The Multidimensional Human by Kurt Leland, which establishes practices for psychic development and astral projection, and it incorporates kind of a lot from Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute and some other sources like Jane Roberts, and it's kind of all over the map. It's a really trippy read, but it provides a lot of exercises for kind of creative visualization to help people in terms of getting out of body, or having, as Kurt Leland calls it, adventures in consciousness. And in Darren talking about what he was just mentioning, it reminded me of what Kurt Leland calls the witness platform. And it's basically like coming up with this kind of establishing safe space in creative visualization, that you can view things in kind of a peaceful, positive neutrality, and that establishing a space like that is often ground zero in a lot of these kinds of protocols and strategies. And I think that it makes a lot of sense in a certain way. It seems kind of out there, but there's a utilitarian element within creative visualization that's so key and so applicable to day-to-day life, right? I mean, think of all the different ways that we could use creative visualization, and we do, to calm ourselves down or be able to motivate ourselves for a day or something like that. And the way that those, it doesn't necessarily have to be a situation where we have to reach the Akashic record in the astral realm or something like that. It could just be a situation where we can use creative visualization to be able to better our day-to-day life, and doing this process could actually have come up with tangible results that we can't even anticipate. And I look forward to those kinds of results, as well as all the stated hopeful ones that we're also looking for when we're talking about this kind of process.
And I would just quickly add that, in many ways, this is like a technology, like not just the HemiSync stuff, but there are interior technologies we can use. And often because in our civilization, we've kind of like, grouped that aside as kind of mushy, subjective stuff. We think it's all just like blurry and incoherent and very personal and subjective. But actually, there are techniques that have been proven to work, and you mentioned that one author, Jay. I'm also familiar with another one that I think I recommended to James one time, Luis Monero, and he wrote a book called Demystifying the Out-of-Body Experience. And it's very, very precise. I don't know if you ever ended up reading it, James, but it's very, very precise. And he calls the astral body the psychosoma. So they have those kind of like really precise definitions about exactly what parts of our energetic being these represent. And the more precise you get, the more you find you can actually use these and move these, and it's kind of malleable. But yeah, it's really useful too, because one of the things you learn in the first couple sessions, I think I've done the first 3 or so, but I've heard about this before in other kind of programs, and that is once you've gone through, like James said, and mastered a couple of them, then you can like on demand fire them up, right? So in the third session, by then he's saying, put your concerns in your energy conversion box, do your resonant tuning, blah, I'll meet you in the room. He's kind of like one after another, right? Whereas in the first session, it's like he gives you 20 minutes or something for each of those. But once you've created that mental bookmark, then you can in later sessions do that. And I often try to do that with other contact practices I'm working with, is I'll have the same candles, the same incense, the same shamanic drumming in the background, because this creates a kind of frequency in my brain that I can snap back into based on memory at that point.
Yeah. And kind of an aside, I want to say, I think partially that's part of the utility of mudras, right? People are familiar with these kind of hand symbols, and I think that's like an ancient form of anchoring, right? Of what they call anchoring in hypnotism and NLP and stuff. I think that without knowing that, that's part of what was actually going on. So every time that you do this little meditation, kind of symbol or mudra with your hands, your brain makes the association, I'm supposed to be in that altered state or that deep state of meditation. So it's kind of like an anchor in that way. But Nathan, did you have something to say to that too?
Well, I would just wanted to piggyback on kind of what both of them had said, and that this is a practice that has a long tradition. I think that's something that we've kind of lost touch with in our modern day. Darren pointed out that we are already in a hypnotic sort of state of being, and the way we just do what we do day in and day out. We don't notice it. We don't think of it in that way. We have all been programmed to kind of move through our world in a very sort of predictable fashion. And so for me, this is it's kind of exciting because it's a technology, it's a way of hacking your mind state to explore these other avenues that you're not frequently treading. So it's a real adventure opportunity for me anyway. If we're going to talk a little bit about expectations, this is a way for me to explore kind of contours and facets of my own mind that I'm not used to exploring. And Jay, as you pointed out, you can use this kind of as a tool to sort of unlock a lot of other sort of aspects of ourselves that we may not necessarily be used to experiencing or interacting with. And that's something that we've all experienced it. We've all experienced these moments. Like everyone could tell you, I had this moment of epiphany. I was in kind of the zone, or I was in the flow, and this thing came to me. It was an idea for a song, or a poem, or an artistic piece that I wanted to create, or just an idea. And how did that happen? How did that just come to me? Well, I was probably doing something very routine at the time. I might have been driving, or taking a shower or, washing the dishes, something where I really didn't think too hard about doing it. I'm in that state. And these things kind of arise from those moments of repetitive behavior. So with this as an actual targeted kind of technology and tool, I think it kind of creates some shortcuts in a way. It helps us really, Darren, as you pointed out, and James as well, these are little kind of bookmarks or tricks that we can use to kind of get into these states, to then explore aspects of ourselves that we're just in our modern life aren't really used to interacting with. And that to me is very exciting, something to look forward to. Obviously, I do have reservations as well, but I think just the general concept is something that, is worth trying.
Yeah, and as far as the expectations aspect, part of why I wanted to go through the gateway experience, or what was called the gateway process, is, can this apply to CE5 and contact, which we're going to end up circling back to, but that in my expectations is something that I want to go through. But also the kind of thing of the out of body experience, right? Like I've had a number of out of body experiences before, but they were all spontaneous, right? The great majority of them were not through me doing some kind of meditation or deep meditation. Although I've had some experiences like that, the most potent experiences for me had just been spontaneous, kind of something a lot of people will be familiar with, probably watching this, is, you're just doing whatever you're doing, and whether you're like sitting in a chair or laying down or whatever you're doing, and all of a sudden you're just you see yourself almost like third person, and you're like, holy crap, why am I seeing myself? And usually, you snap right back into your body at that point. So I've had, a number of experiences like that where it was just like so vivid, right? And the idea that you can have, either you can induce it at will or have something like that more frequently occur, I think is fascinating. So, I don't know how, the gateway experience, truly delivers on that. And I think that it's going to be, varied per individual. I have plenty of experience with meditation, so I don't know if that's actually a good or bad thing when coming into the gateway experience, right? Because I already have kind of like my way of thinking, the way I go about practice. So even when starting this, I kind of had to just like step back and say, okay, I'm just going to kind of do a meta energy conversion box and put away the stuff I think I know, just so I can really fully go through the process beginning to end as it's instructed, without getting in my own way, and going through the process and seeing what I can kind of benefit through that.
I think what you're talking about here, it's a really, there's an earnest, honest sense of exploration and discovery that we're looking at here. And one of the things that I deeply appreciate about it is that, these kinds of exercises are often used by experiencers to kind of pull back and regain sovereignty in a way, because as you're talking about, many situations that would happen in these kinds of situations where people have an out-of-body experience, where they have a near-death experience, where they have some kind of contact experience, it's not necessarily on their own terms, right? That's more often the case than not. And so I think that one of the interesting kind of expectations, or one of the interesting ways that this could get framed and why it might be interesting for people that have had any kind of anomalous experience before or not, is like, for those that haven't, it's a way to induce that kind of a state, right? In a way that doesn't involve drugs or doesn't involve, many other things that might be unsafe or unhealthy. And then at the same time, for people that have had these experiences before, it can be a way to design or try to kind of come up with a system so that you can decide when you're going to approach these realms, right? And so that's a way that it really marries very well with human contact initiated like HEIS, CE5, and other things like that, right? Where it's nice to be able to take control over, or feel like you can. That's one of the temptations here is like, can we have control over our anomalous experiences? Can we design when they begin and end? And I think it remains open-ended to me whether we can, whether we can say when those begin or end.
Yeah, right. Or even become more skillful in that realm. So if you do have a spontaneous experience, say, hey, what can I do here through my experience and practice that can, kind of get me through this or assist in that kind of process, right? And I do think that applies here.
If I could quickly interject, James, I remember telling you about this one experience I had, speaking of spontaneous experiences that we didn't control, or at least didn't have complete control over. I had this one experience I can't remember when it was when I told you about this, but it was about a year ago, I think. And I was driving and I was listening to actually just an interview with Luis Monero, that guy who has written a lot about out-of-body experiences. And this just goes to show you that there are technologies and techniques you can use, but sometimes something's happening to your psychosoma or to your astral body that you're not even necessarily aware of. And hopefully what we're doing here is learning to be more self-aware about the states that we're actually putting ourselves into so that we have more granular control. Because what happened to me on this particular case was I was driving back through my neighborhood here, which is kind of in the woods. And right at the moment he was talking about one of his experiences, this was like the only true out-of-body experience I had, like outside of intentionally trying to do this, where suddenly I was on the trail about 100 yards to the side of the car. So I was driving a car when this happened, right? And I suddenly was in the woods along this trail. At least it looked like a trail to me. And so immediately my sort of rational brain said, this can't be safe, you're driving. So then I popped right back into my body almost immediately. And this happened just from listening to an interview with this guy talking about having an out-of-body experience. Later on, I went back to that area. I had to be sort of careful because it was sort of behind someone's property, but I'd never been back in that particular area. But I wanted to see if it matched what I had seen in my supposed astral body, and it did. So I went through the trees and actually saw this trail that you can't see from the road. You actually have to be on the trail behind this tree line to even know it's there. So that's where my astral body popped into 100 yards off the road, and afterwards was able to confirm that it was actually there. So that was a fascinating, but also a cautionary tale to be aware of where you are when you're doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And we also wanted to touch on reservations. So just regarding reservations, let's start with Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't have a lot of experience with this, so this is more uncharted territory for me. I think I can think of a lot of sort of common, I don't know if they are critiques per se, or maybe reservations that people have about these kinds of techniques. One that, Darren, with your experience that you just shared, a lot of folks would have skepticism, as to whether that is actually happening, right? We hear that often. We're talking about terms that in our kind of mainstream life just aren't really acknowledged as being real, quote unquote real. Astral projection or out of body experiences. Most folks in the Western world in a materialist mindset aren't willing to go there, and instead what they're going to do is say, well, you are basically going through a kind of state of hypnosis to create or induce an experience that you think is real, you think is out of body, but isn't really real itself. So I've grown up obviously like the rest of you in our society, and that comes readily to mind when I think about this practice and the concepts that we're talking about. So there's a little voice inside that's like, what are we really talking about? Is it really real? Is it something that we can actually do, or is this just a way that our brains can be tricked into believing that this is what is happening to us? So, I don't know if that really falls into a solid reservation bucket, but it is something that I do have to wrestle with as I'm kind of voluntarily going into this experience. But another kind of more deeply sort of felt reservation is, is this, and I've experienced this at least to some degree already in my own meditation practice. How is this going to transform who I am, who I know myself to be? And the deeper that I find myself going into these kinds of practices, the more that I sort of begin to look at myself as a little bit of my concept of self, the Nathan that I know, becomes a little bit more and more of a foreign character to me. So it becomes this sort of thing that I can objectify in a way that I have not done before. I can kind of hold it at arm's length and see from different facets and angles this identity that I have pieced together over experiences throughout my life to create this person, this figure. So these practices in a way kind of expose, in my mind, and Darren, we've talked about this a lot, expose just the fact that we're doing this all the time. That this is a way, it's kind of it's a crack in the mortar of that veneer, that you're kind of you're voluntarily chipping away at this thing that you have constructed and worked so hard at putting together, and you're exposing things that are underneath that are, quite frankly, maybe more real than the veneer itself. So it's something that, as you get into this, you get deeper in these practices, you have to be to some degree a little bit comfortable and also brave, I think, to kind of tackle and face whatever things you are going to discover as you go through that process. So I'm excited, but I have a little bit of trepidation because I just don't know what kinds of sort of new experiences I'm going to uncover and how I'm going to feel about them, how it's going to change who I think of myself to be.
If I could quickly jump into just to touch on or build on what Nathan just said there, because I think those are really valid points. And there will be people watching this who think, yeah, how do you know you're not just sort of convincing yourself of this, right? If you have a vivid imagination, who's to say you couldn't just imagine that you're, on a different planet or whatever. But speaking of that Luis Monero guy, they have an entire association, international one, and they actually will conduct full-on scientific experiments where they will actually have a random number kind of generator program set up with like 500 different photos. And what happens is, under no one's control, just the computer program is choosing this, will choose a particular photo, right? And they'll have a scientist who's unrelated to the association, right? So it's an objective observer in the room with a locked door, standing by the computer. He's not seeing the image either. He's just watching the door, making sure no one's coming in. And then while that's going on, people will actually practice having an out-of-body experience, an astral voyage, and they will actually, their task is to go into the room in their astral body, make note of what image it was. And again, we're not talking about like 1 or 4, like we're talking like 500 images, right? And very, very different, everything you can imagine. Then they go back, and after they come back into their body, they are to write down what they saw, and then they compare. So there are a lot of really strong protocols there to make sure no one's faking it, no one's sneaking in. And it's consistently been found that they actually can produce real results. And this is similar to how someone might have a near-death experience, which is similar to an out-of-body experience, right? In the hospital, and report seeing a sneaker on the roof, right, of the hospital. Later on, someone will go up and check, and sure enough, there's a sneaker that you could only see if you were actually above the hospital. So there actually are ways, and it has been demonstrated over time, documented, that this really is happening. This is not just people imagining it.
Yeah, and Jay, did you have anything in regards to reservations about kind of going through the gateway experience?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate Darren mentioning that case. I remember reading about that in Leslie Kane's Surviving Death, and that it's one of the more interesting, like, veridical accounts of leaving the body. I think it's a fantastic case of that sneaker kind of on the rim outside of a hospital building. It's super cool. So I as far as reservations go, people may have had experiences in life where they feel like their body is a contested zone, or like it's even like kind of a conflict zone, and that can happen through like assault. It can happen through forms of physical violence. It can happen in situations where people have felt like they've had non-human entity encounters, like abductions against their will, and that that those kinds of conversations are coming more into the public conversation. And I, of course, for many different reasons, I have interest in that kind of breaching public consciousness. But, for those reasons, the idea of having an out-of-body experience, leaving your body somewhere where you are not, of course, there's going to be, for some people, there's going to be a challenge there. And I have to admit that I do feel a challenge there that I definitely want to get over. And I think that it can be a point that can even be therapeutic and helpful in terms of saying like, okay, I can trust myself, I can trust this process, and I can move through these exercises and trust that my body's going to be okay when I get back. Because I think that regardless of whether you've had experiences where you felt your body was in danger or not, it can be a very positive situation to have one of these adventures in consciousness, come back and recognize that you're okay. And I look forward to being able to have a situation like that. I think that that would be a really positive experience for this study group, for me.
Yeah, personally, I don't really have many reservations regarding it, because I've had sporadic ones, and I had something akin to an NDE, and I felt like and even something kind of related, the yoga nidra, which could be similar to lucid dreaming or Tibetan dream yoga. And I don't know, I feel through those experiences that I have some kind of familiarity with the territory, that I don't really have concerns other than what's going to come next, basically. Like I'm actually looking forward to it. But Darren, did you have any reservations personally?
I personally don't really, but I really appreciate what Jay added. And I think that it's really important for us to think about that whenever you're doing this as a group, is that people have a variety of experiences in terms of how much their body and their personal space has felt like a safe zone, and has felt like they've had control over the traffic around it, and sometimes within it. I personally, kind of like you, James, have had sort of numerous modalities that I've employed, numerous protocols I've employed to try to push the limit in terms of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And at this point, my take is that we as a Western civilization are really missing out. And we were actually the exception to the rule in terms of human history, that when human history was more based around shamanic practices, this kind of thing was much more common. And I think even some of the maladies of our contemporary civilization, in terms of a consumer culture and just thinking we can dominate the earth, is because we're out of touch with that deeper connection with everything. And what I find is these kinds of experiences help me reconnect with the oneness of everything. So I have personally always found it to be a very positive experience. And I've basically never said no to any experience so far. There's been a couple non-ordinary states of consciousness I've got into that have felt so intense that I felt like I was going to die, to be honest. But I've always come back from those. I always survived and was better for it. So sort of again, through experience, to touch on Jay's point, my experience, right, my history has been a positive one, but I am completely understanding for people who have maybe not had that experience, that it would feel much more daunting. So I think it really does matter what we're bringing to the table, what our experience is, what our history is, and we need to be thoughtful of that whenever we're encouraging people to do this as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I just want to make sure we said it, as a caveat, right? I think folks who are maybe planning to try this themselves, anytime you're doing something that's new, you want to kind of do that carefully, thoughtfully. You want to understand your own baseline. Don't jump too far, too fast. Just to kind of take your time with it and really check in with where you are. And if it's something that you're consistently having a very uncomfortable, discombobulating, sort of experience, that's probably a sign to listen to yourself and take a step back, reevaluate, and maybe not pursue that further. Now, there's also, situations where a little discomfort, Darren, you pointed this out, is actually good. You to kind of push past that discomfort and explore that new territory and overcome that concern. But I think everybody's different. Everyone has to kind of feel this out for themselves, and this may not be the right thing for someone to try, depending on kind of where you are in your current journey.
It's true. And
go ahead, Jay.
Okay. Well, I mean, along the lines of what Nathan was just saying, it could not be the right journey for one of us in the study group, and I appreciate that we're kind of recording this as an initial read on what we're going into, because who knows what's going to happen over the next months with us going through this process, talking to each other, journaling. We talked about journaling earlier. I think that journaling makes a lot of sense and could be really fruitful in terms of making sure that we have these kind of benchmarks and tethers through the process of how we shift through this experience. And I just want to kind of, yes, and Nathan's point that, this is probably not going to be the route for everybody. And it might not even be the route for one of us, and that can be okay, right? Because, I remember when I was in grad school, right? And I did this huge project where I was going to haunted locations and I was documenting them, I was filming them. And in many ways, that was one of the dumbest ideas I've ever had in my entire life. Easily one of the dumbest ideas I've ever had in my entire life was like, okay, I'm going to go to all these places that are the most, according to the local areas, right? According to the lore right there, the worst places you could possibly go. And I was like, I'm going to do that to face my fears of my anomalous experiences. And what happened, like there was plenty there. Like I blew through several different friends / assistant camera people that were like out there to help me and assist me and be around me. And people were like, screw this, man. Like I'm going home. Like it's too much. And it was a challenge, right? And what happened, coming back home and then realizing that, this is kind of before like the hitchhiker effect was something that was in public consciousness, at least among seekers like ourselves. And if I could go back and change anything about my life, that would be one thing where I'd be like, maybe I should just do something a little bit safer to graduate film school rather than put myself in those kinds of zones. And at the same time, here I am 15 years later than that. And I appreciate that we have the kind of friendship and camaraderie that we do, that we can go into this kind of situation and compare notes and try to do it in a thoughtful, methodical way and be respectful about each other, our boundaries, and where we are in the days ahead, and see what's there. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and in the HemiSync gateway experience instructions, each of the 7 waves has like an instruction manual or outline of that wave, and it says in the wave, like, if there's a disclaimer basically that says, if you have even certain medical conditions, maybe you shouldn't be using the HemiSync tones, because they could have a negative effect. So yeah, you definitely want to research the HemiSync process if you're going to try it, just for your own self-care. And again, I think a mental self-check is this something that I want to participate in or try, is always a good thing to do. And if you feel all right, try it out and see how it feels. And if it's going good for you, then yeah, you can continue it.
If I could just add too, James, yeah, along the point you're making, there's the one part that's what the protocol, that's the personal energy balloon or something, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's a kind of a visualization you use to create a protective shield. Now, I understand that some people, and so they say to keep your own radiation within, right, and keep other radiation out, basically, is the idea. And I understand some people who are skeptical are going to be like, what do you mean? You're just like imagining stuff. What good does that do? But I think what we're saying is the evidence suggests that really does do something, that we actually have a lot of granular control in these subtle realms. But to Jay's point, I think it is important to point out not just that you don't always want to say yes to everything. You want to be self-aware. But James, you and I have talked about this with spiritual hygiene and self-awareness. If you have a lot of fear, no one's judging you, right? I mean, there can be very valid reasons why people have a lot of fear, right? Based on their personal history. That's probably a good sign not to jump into this. I would say that you actually probably want to do some work, see if you can work through some of that fear first, so that when you do enter into these subtle states, that's not your dominant modality, because so often we get reflected back to us what we're putting in, especially in these subtle realms. And so I do want to caution people that if you're feeling that, maybe do some preparatory work before you go in. I would also want to add to Jay's point about the haunted houses and jumping in full board. If someone were to invite me to Skinwalker Ranch, I would have serious reservations. So I don't want to say that I'm like, hey, whatever it is, I'll go, right? No, I'm not saying that. I always do try to evaluate, what's the cost benefit analysis here. And there are people who have been at the ranch, right, who say they went in going, come on, what can happen? I'm going to go for it, right? Even when they were warned. And then in retrospect, even with some physical ailments, right, that showed up, they had some regrets. So I think it is worth paying attention to that, and that we really are talking about a multidimensional cosmos with a lot of different entities, a lot of different energies, a lot of different elements that can actually impact our physical bodies even. So I don't want to encourage that. I'm saying whatever it is, just go for it. Don't be a chicken. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that be wise, be self-aware, but also don't, lock yourself inside your room and never go out. Like, just do some preparatory work, begin to explore this, but do it step by step.
Yeah. And, one kind of major interest that I have with the gateway experience is like, okay, how can this affect a process like CE5 or contact, heist, human initiated contact experience or event? So that's definitely one reason that I'm highly interested in doing the gateway experience. Again, for several reasons. If you can use this and you're practicing and doing out of body experience or astral travel, and even through the different waves, there's different exercises that make sense in a scenario like CE5 or contact work. One of the waves, they actually have a remote viewing exercise. So in the CE5 protocols, remote viewing is part of one of the protocols, is actually being able to do remote viewing to either actually remotely sense or see a non-human intelligence, to vector them to your area. So there's an exercise like that built right into the system. And when you go further along, I believe it's in like wave 5 or 6, which is you're coming to the end of the wave. There's actually an exercise, or in one of the waves, there's a thing, it says non-physical friends, right? So that's like pretty directly affiliated with contact work. And I didn't actually do the exercise, but I read it, was skimming through some of the manuals, and I saw that and I was like, wow. And the goal in the exercise is to have a direct experience with a non-physical intelligence, which for some people that might be really far out and they might not even want to go there. And I can understand that. But for me, I'm like, wow, that's intriguing. That's fascinating. Because I've had experiences like that spontaneously in some regard. So I think that it's interesting that's actually built into the system, the gateway experience, again, towards the end of the waves. But I think it makes a lot of sense that if you're somebody who is doing contact work or HEIS, that it really makes sense to experiment with a system like this. Number one, it's kind of it's structured, so it has that. It's kind of like good practice and exercise, regarding even just regular meditation and or visualization. So it has great use in that, even if you were just using like the first wave regularly just to kind of stay fresh and prepared and practice in kind of meditation and consciousness. So I think that, it makes a lot of sense if that you're going to do something like contact work. There's a lot of things in this system. And again, this is a before thought, and I'm going to be interested to see my perspective on the after when we come back in a few months and see kind of where my thought is. And actually at that point, I will have been out in the field after, going through this process a number of times. So I think it makes a lot of sense if you're doing something like contact work. Something like this could only benefit you, in my opinion. What do you think about it, Exo?
Yeah, I think it can benefit and it's related for sure. I think that I've talked before about trying to facilitate modes when you're outside of the running of yourself by your executive ego. So part of the whole idea of putting your concerns aside before you jump into this is to sort of let a different part of yourself arise up. And as you guys know, whether it's meditation or meditation leading to CE5 or HEIS, a lot of what we're doing there is trying to let the things that usually block out our mind, right? We only have so much mind space, and it often is taken up with daily concerns, things we got to do, things we're worried about. And so often the other aspects of reality are there. They're just like in the background, and they never have a chance to rise up and come into our metacognition, our awareness. And so I think all of these are related: remote viewing, telepathy, all sorts of psi work, astral travel, high C5. I think it's all part of the same domain, and I'm all for it. I think that a lot of people actually, and I've talked to you about this, James, a lot of people really focus on C5/HEIS. I think some of this work is actually even more interesting personally for me. I mean, I do both.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree.
For me, it's like when I've done HEIS and C5, I'll get a, and I've had successful times doing it. I'll see stuff and I'll feel certain things. But the strongest sort of telepathic communication I've had, where I feel like I'm downloading information and having kind of a dialogue, has been in these kinds of states, actually, when I'm inside my room, not outside, and using these different protocols. So I definitely see as part and parcel all of the same thing.
Well, what about you, Nathan?
Yeah, well, to me, what came to mind is we talk about the connection to contact work is my religious studies background and kind of familiarity with Christianity in particular. And the reason why I want to touch on that is that the terminology that we're using around this protocol and practice, it can sound quite foreign to folks that are not used to thinking in these terms, right? Thinking about a connection with a non-human intelligence or astral traveling or remote viewing. These are all terms that are, they sound quite out there. But if you grew up in the West and have any kind of familiarity with a religious tradition, these aren't concepts that really should be new to you. There's a lot of understanding and tradition and practice within those religious traditions that attempt to do these very same things. So one can argue that certain kinds of prayer practice or certain kinds of meditative practice within a Christian tradition is trying to get in touch with a non-human intelligence. It's called God in that instance. It's not, you're not thinking of them as some sort of, aliens from another, solar system or whatnot, but you are trying to connect with something that is not human and get knowledge, information, perspective, connection with whatever that happens to be. So I wanted to point that out because I just think it's there's a lot of, we're kind of, and we have to do the work, I think, to some degree of translating some of the experiences that we are more familiar with, just because we grew up in that kind of soup, that cultural soup. They don't seem strange to us, but we have to think about ways we can translate those things that are familiar into this sort of new way of these new different modalities that we're experimenting with, and kind of help to show that there is a lot of commonality there throughout human history. And I think that, at least for me anyway, that really does kind of bring these practices into focus in a way that doesn't make them seem, quite as outlandish or new agey or foreign as I think that they may seem to a lot of other people. And quite frankly, I've only been able to look at it this way because I have been out of a Christian tradition for so many years. It took me many years to not be in the church, to start seeing things I had done in the church as strange, kind of practices akin to the things we are now talking about. So I think that if folks who are listening find this to be a little bit weird, just examine the things that you have experienced in your own life that you have grown to think of as quote unquote normal, and think about, what really is not necessarily as normal about it as you may have assumed. And we do a lot of things too in our day-to-day life that are we are kind of engaging in them in activities with the intent of having certain experience. So like if I'm going to a concert, for example, and I'm going to listen to music that I know and love, and I'm going there with the intent of having a good time and singing the songs and doing that with a lot of other people who are also present, I'm going with the expectation that I'm going to have an experience that is going to be outside my normal experience. So that's just a mundane example of something that we would all look at and go, yeah, that's totally fine, not a big deal, you can do that. But really, it is a way of transforming your consciousness and your conscious experience. I think these are doing the same thing, just in a way that may to others sound, kind of out there, but are actually, pretty familiar and should be, when you're really looking at them, you should see a lot of corollary to things that you're already comfortable with.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that point, Nathan, really great point. And you think about it, I mean, our school system used to do the Lord's Prayer, right, in the morning. So we used to have like 8-year-olds communicating with a non-human intelligence before they start their school day, right?
Yep.
To put it in context. And for me, when I sort of also have a similar background as Nathan, and for me, Thomas Merton's work was a really key sort of transition point between Buddhism and Christianity. And towards the end of his life, he was actually communicating with Buddhist monks and realizing there was a lot of common ground there. And in some ways, it's different trails that lead to the same top of the mountain, whether it's the Sufi Muslims or contemplative Christianity or Buddhism or shamanic work. These all, in some ways, at the most, at the summit of all of these traditions, it actually looks remarkably similar. Sometimes the terminology is different, but at the end of the day, the protocols end up looking quite similar at the end of the day.
Yeah, and Jay, what did you think in regards to the gateway experience and how it can interact or be involved with contact and contact work?
Well, I'm really curious, and along the lines of what Darren and Nathan were just saying, the idea that people would start the day with the Lord's Prayer, students and things like that. there's an element here where somebody might be watching this video in the future, or one of us might even be watching this video in the future, and we realize, like, where were we at that point in time? What were we thinking about? And I think one of the considerations here is that it's not about something that we're necessarily going to completely buy into or something like that, as people often do with religious, with like prayers, like the Lord's Prayer or something like that. What we're talking about here is, at least as far as where I'm coming from, is a form of utilitarian exploration, where we're gonna try to put on the outfit and see if it fits, right? And for example, Sean Asbjorn Hargens, who's going to be speaking at the conference coming up that Darren is going to be at, and James and I are going to be at. Sean has this phrase that he often uses, which is like, take it seriously and hold it lightly. And I think that that's something that we can really do here, or it's something that I will come into it with, which is doing it as earnestly and honestly as I can, and then seeing what works for me and taking that, and then leaving what doesn't. And I think that that's kind of like, in many situations like that, it's one of the best strategies one could do. And I think that it'll be helpful in the days ahead in terms of seeing if astral travel, if out-of-body experience, if Bob Monroe's work, etc., really works for me or not.
Yeah, and I also say, even just as a kind of explorative meditation practice, I think it's something interesting, because you're doing the practice however often you're doing it, maybe once a day or twice a day or a few times a week. You're getting a meditation session in, and maybe some visualization. So there's also ways that this can translate to creativity and other things like that. Maybe you do the gateway experience and you're getting better sleep. There's different applications to it, and some are probably more obvious than you would even expect. Again, you're basically doing meditation sessions in a sense. So if you're not experienced in meditation, you're actually getting in kind of a good foundational groundwork of what meditation might look like. And if you like, you can carry on and end up doing another meditation practice afterwards, or continue with the gateway experience. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this video is, again, this is like a preliminary kind of video where we're coming together as like this gateway experience study group. And for people watching and listening, this is the first time we're actually all having a conversation on video about it ourselves. So this is really our preliminary entry into the actual gateway experience. And I'm really looking forward to going through the process. I'm like really interested in it. It's fascinating that the CIA was interested in it. And I've gone through the first wave already. I'm in the second wave. And I think I really what I've been doing personally is I've been stacking it with my own meditation practice. So either I'm combining in that way. So essentially I'm getting extra meditation in by doing it. But I think that going through this process is going to be beneficial. Again, I think if in my expectation point that it probably will be assistful in kind of like contact work. And I've already kind of benefited from it in a way after getting it down and becoming more comfortable with it. I like some of the exercises already. I think that they're helpful. Even like Exo was saying, even in your day-to-day, that kind of idea of the energy conversion box, you have that kind of technique on hand for whatever. It's like, okay, your boss is yelling at you, energy conversion box or something like that. There's different applications for it. And I already see benefit from it in my own experience, you know, even just getting more meditation sessions in. So I'm looking forward to doing the kind of updates that we're going to do with the study group. You know, we haven't charted it out yet. Maybe we'll come back in like another few months or a month, you know, whatever we decide to do. But I'm looking forward to it. Does anybody have any closing thoughts here on this session?
I'll
Starting
quickly
with
add
Jay,
that
or Exo.
speaking of direct relevance to contact work, you guys may remember I did a podcast episode on a guy named Peter Whitley, who actually used astral travel protocols to make contact with the same alien beings that had abducted him previously. Right. So when you think about that, there's a lot of really interesting mix going on there. So he had experiences from a young age of being abducted by a group of Greys. And he's also had experiences where he and his young son were also abducted, which is quite common, that there's multi-generational experiences. But he actually wanted to take the front foot and say, how do I contact them? So he actually took this very course, the Gateway Experience, taught himself it. Then he actually developed and recorded his own initiation protocol, right? So you can use your own voice. Once you know what works for you, record that and play it back to yourself. So rather than hearing Bob Monroe's voice, you're actually maybe hearing your own voice that's really geared to what works for you, right? And that's one thing that Luis Monero talks about, is like, try a variety of different techniques to see which one works best for you, because it tends to vary from person to person. And then he was actually able to make contact with alien beings, the same ones that he had been abducted by, through this astral projection kind of protocol. So that just shows you how directly the relevance is to contact work.
And I appreciate hearing that about Peter Whitley. I think that sounds fantastic. I'm going to follow up on that a little bit, because I think that it sounds like he was paving a way that I might find utilitarian strategy in, and would be great in terms of kind of getting past my reservations, approaching this in an earnest, honest way, and being able to move forward with you all in these kinds of explorations. And I really look forward to this as kind of like a ground zero kind of palate cleanser, in terms of establishing a ground with which we can kind of refer back to in the future. You know, whether we're doing contact work, whether we're doing field work, no matter what we're doing, it will be a gateway experience into the future, and we can use it to find a tether for ourselves as researchers. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I just
Nathan.
go ahead. I just want to thank you, James, for I think putting this together and kind of spearheading this initiative. You know, for me, these are the kinds of things that I think we need to start doing in our attempts to, you know, deepen our understanding of what's going on. You know, as you point out, James, you know, at the very least, you know, you're going to get a meditation experience that I think will benefit you in some form or fashion. But I think beyond that, we are, at least I'm fairly convinced, and I certainly could be wrong, but I think we are, you know, we're living in an age, and we're transitioning into an age where we're going to need, you know, sort of better practices, better methodologies to kind of, I think, cope with the way our reality is changing in light of the disclosure process and the phenomenon itself, and just the way, even just the way our worldview is changing as a society. And so for me, this is a way for us to take a more active engagement role in that process, and not kind of be passive and just sort of let things happen. It's a way to really engage with it directly, and hopefully in that process really kind of be transformed into a broader, greater, deeper awareness of what's happening. And, you know, not only am I excited to do this virtually with you guys, but I'm looking forward to opportunities where we can do this in person together, either in the field or, you know, in some other fashion. And I've talked about this very idea with all of you to some degree, you know, that I think we need to, you know, kind of deepen our connections to one another, and lean on each other with our different viewpoints and perspectives, because it's really going to take a lot of folks, not even just the four of us, obviously, like many people who have been doing this kind of work in the past, who are doing this work now, who are going to be looking to do more of this work in the future. It's going to take a lot of folks to, I think, coordinate and learn and grow so that we can really have a better grasp on what's going on here.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, imagine in the future, instead of like the kids locked in their rooms playing video games, they're meeting astrally through the gateway experience for hours a day, right? No, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And just kind of to close us out, I did want to mention which, as Jay mentioned before as well. And EXO Academian is going to be there. We have an event coming up in New York City called An Inquiry into Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomenon, October 8th. And you can be there in person in New York City, or you can join us through the live stream. And I'm really looking forward to that because, again, EXO over here is going to be there. Nathan, we wish you were there, but hopefully we'll see you in the future.
We'll be there in spirit.
Yeah, for sure. On the live stream, right?
That's
right.
right.
And of course, J. Christopher King is going to be there. So I appreciate everybody not only coming on this video, but like joining me in this gateway experience journey over the next several months and kind of going through this whole thing. And I think doing it in this kind of study group framework, not only is it kind of like fun, it's like, oh wow, I have friends I can kind of like do this with, but it's almost supportive and encouraging in a way. And we might be able to talk about different roadblocks or things that we come across, and somebody else's experience could kind of help you see it in a different way that could help. So I think that this is a really cool kind of study group and kind of experiment and journey we're going to go on. And I appreciate everybody for joining me in this.
Oh, I appreciate it too. I think that, if somebody were to go back in time and tell me 5 years ago that I would meet these like great, thoughtful new friends that I would be able to collaborate with and be able to do things like the Gateway experience or this conference that we have coming up, like I wouldn't even believe that person. This is a really brilliant and wonderful thing to do, and I really appreciate the effort and the interest that you've put into this, James, in terms of putting this together. And I'm looking forward to the future with the four of us here. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So thank you so much, guys. And we will all see you next time. Take care.